Hey friends, welcome to another video. This is Judd the Realtor with Big Rivers Real Estate and Coldwell Banker Realty. This week, it's been a minute since I've gotten on camera. So this week I wanted to talk a little bit about some new rule changes that we now have in the real estate market. So I'll kind of talk through the history of that, really what that means for you, whether you're a buyer or a seller. I'll talk through those things and then provide a little bit of opinion and kind of my hot take on it. So if we back things up, we have there's what is just kind of generally referred to as the NAR settlement. That's the National Association of Realtors, which I and every other realtor in the state of Minnesota, Wisconsin, across the nation, if you have the realtor designation, you are part of NAR. And what happened with this lawsuit is back in 2019, there was a class action lawsuit where the plaintiffs, which would be home buyers and home sellers, alleged that realtors were essentially fixing prices on commission rates. That was in Missouri. I can only speak for the two states that I'm licensed in, Minnesota and Wisconsin, and just kind of keep that in mind as we move through the video. But nevertheless, that's where things started, was in Missouri. I don't know their rules, I don't know the regulations, but I can assure you that the paperwork in Minnesota and Wisconsin very, very clearly spells out commission. Where the fees go, meaning does it go to the listing broker or the buyer's broker, what that percentage is, it is really, really clearly spelled out. But in this lawsuit, they essentially state that the consumer was not aware of commissions and where they were going and what the amount was. So in light of all that, of course, everything was in the courts for a couple of years, and NAR, the National Association of Realtors, settled for, I think it was $418 million. And through a settlement, you don't really admit to wrongdoing, but through that, comes typically some rule changes which we do see. Just kind of a caveat here, anytime there's a lawsuit or a class action, you always wonder, where does the money go, right? Because it starts as this lawsuit is supposed to help the consumer. So I have some conflicting reports that I've found, but the litigating law firm, so the law firm that represented the plaintiffs, I've seen figures anywhere from $150 to $250 million that the firm will receive. Okay, so that's a lot of money. And then the rest is to be split up between anybody who essentially qualifies as a plaintiff. And I've seen figures as low as $13 that you would receive as a plaintiff. So while at face value, it's supposed to benefit the consumer, does this money really do that? I personally don't think so. But nevertheless, from that came some changes. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the two changes and how that applies to you, again, whether you're buying or selling a home. And so the first and probably the biggest change is that we can no longer advertise a buyer's compensation in the MLS. So meaning if I list your home, typically, prior to August 17th, that's when these rules took place. Prior to that, I would have been able to list that you as the seller are willing to pay out 2%, 2.5%, 3%, whatever you decide you're comfortable with, to somebody who brings a buyer and represents a buyer through the transaction. So one of the changes through the settlement states that we can no longer advertise a buyer's broker compensation through the MLS. Now, what is really confusing is that I can advertise a buyer's commission anywhere else. So I can put it on the sign in the yard, I can put it on my Facebook page, on my business page, in the newsletter that you guys receive. I can advertise it everywhere except the MLS. So that's rule change number one. I'll come back to my thoughts on that. Rule change number two, that's, again, these are the two bigger things, is that buyer representation contracts must be signed prior to a buyer being shown a property by an agent. So what does that mean? Prior to this past Saturday, what I was able to do, if I had somebody call me and they say, hey Judd, I'm really thinking about buying a house. I'm not sure if I'm quite ready, but can we just go look at some things and see if it's a good fit for our family right now? I would say, yeah, sure, let's go. I don't get paid until the buyers purchase a home. So, I mean, this is standard for me. I go out and we spend all sorts of time together. Whether or not they purchase a home makes no difference. Let me back up. I only get paid if they purchase a home. So if we look at 1 or we look at 100, that makes no difference. And if they decide not to purchase, that's fine too. Then off we go and hey, give me a call in 2 years when you're ready. And so the new rule states that we need to sign a buyer representation contract before looking at any homes. I can tell you I've had that conversation with a couple folks already. It's not that big of a deal, but I will say I in the future, I can actually see that buyers might feel a little uncomfortable, especially if it's an agent they're not familiar with or it's their first time buying a home, where they may call, they see a sign in the yard, they may call that agent, and then they're told, sign this document that states that you're gonna work with me for the next 6 months, and you, as the buyer, will pay me a certain amount of commission. That's a lot to take on. So, in theory, it's meant to protect the buyer. That's what the lawsuit intends. In practice, I don't really see it as being that great for the buyer. I think it will force buyers into a contract before they're ready, and maybe with an agent they're not super comfortable with. And like any contract, once you're in, you certainly can get out, but it just can be uncomfortable, right? So anyway, so those are the two outcomes of the lawsuit. But let's talk about the application of this. What do these changes mean for you? So I'll speak to the sellers first. Sellers, if I list your house, you invite me into your home, you say, hey, we're thinking about selling our property. I interview, you decide to work with me. We fill out a listing contract, just like we did before. None of that changes. I have a listing fee that I say, hey, this is what we agree to. You say, yeah, that works for me. We sign the document. We still will discuss if you want to pay out a buyer's agent commission. And I think that's a responsible thing to do. If somebody's working really hard and they're bringing a buyer to come through, showing them lots of properties, they help the buyer navigate through all the process, get them with a lender, work through the inspections. We have a great professional agent on the other side. I think it's a great thing to offer a buyer's broker compensation. As always, commission is completely negotiable. And that was another thing that the lawsuit alleged, that somehow commissions weren't negotiable. And I can tell you, as a buyer's agent, I've been paid 0.8% at closing, and I've been paid up to 3%. And to me, my job is to get my client, the future homeowner, into the house. So to eliminate that really doesn't have a ton of value by eliminating from the MLS. But again, we're talking about the sellers here. Other than that, nothing else changes for you, seller. Truly nothing changes. I've talked about this at length. I can't find any situation where my process of talking a seller through the contract, the next steps, how we market the house, how we sell the house, how we negotiate, none of that changes. Okay, so really as a seller, despite the headlines you might read that say the real estate industry has changed forever, it hasn't. Fast forward 1 year from now, maybe I eat my words, but to this point, I don't see any reason why, certainly as a seller, why things would be any different for you. As a buyer, what's different? Really the biggest thing that you will feel as a buyer is that you will be asked to sign a representation contract at the first meeting. You'll be asked, and we as agents have to, before we show you a property, we have to enter into a representation contract. So one thing that I would do if I were buying a home is get started sooner than later, meaning you want to start interviewing agents. It takes a while to feel things out. And typically when we go through homes, it's a nice way to get to know somebody. But now we have to sign the buyer representation contract right away. So take that time where you normally maybe interview the agents kind of as you look at a couple houses. Now you just do that sooner. You'll sit down in their office, have a Zoom call over the phone, whatever it might be, ask the questions that are important to you, and then you'll hire that person. There's also a lot of noise in the industry stating that buyers will be paying their agent commission directly, meaning you, the buyer, agree to, let's say, 2.5% of the sale price, and you'll pay that to your buyer's agent. Some agents might do that. I can promise every single client of mine, I will never ask you to write me a check directly. I will always negotiate my commission, my fee, into the offer. Now, that means that terms may look a little bit different, but I will never ask a buyer to cut me a check at the closing table. That's a business practice. I won't be doing that. So with all that said, we have seen headlines that state home values will drop because of the NAR settlement. The way we buy homes will have changed forever. I really don't see it. I really don't. And unfortunately, for those of you buying a home and hoping that home prices will drop, there are a lot of things that can impact home value. What the commission rate is not one of them. It really is not. And that's something that's been really frustrating to see in the news, is that there's this underlying tone that by changing the commission structure that somehow home values will change. They won't. Let's say an agent gets paid 2%. One, they're still going to get paid somehow, right? Some agents may ask their buyer to pay for it. Other agents like me will ask the seller to pay for it. But let's just say somehow 2% gets eliminated. Well, if you're buying a $500,000 house, 2% does not plummet the value of the home, right? It's still a $500,000 house. So there's always, with change, people get nervous, people get excited in some cases. I know that there are some opportunities where I think this could really benefit agents. But at the end of the day, as always, you want to work with a professional agent, somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who's familiar with the home buying and home selling process. So whatever side you're on, whatever you're trying to do, that agent can advise you through the process. So hopefully you didn't get too wrapped up in the headlines. I hope this was helpful. I know it's a lot of information. If you want, maybe you guys can comment or shoot me an email or something. We can talk a little bit more about specifics. But nevertheless, that's the changes that we have as of August 17th, 2024. And so I hope to see you in the next video. And again, certainly if you have questions, just get a hold of me somehow.